Here.
Mr. Dimick.
Here.
Miss Ryan.
Here.
Miss Dodd.
Here.
Miss Cotter.
Here.
And Mr. Wiseman.
Here.
Present and accounted for.
Thank you very much. Could we all stand, please? And here to assist in leading of the national anthem is Milford High School Theater and Choir member Hannah Scripture. She is part of Central Stage and is taking a quick break from her rehearsal for the upcoming musical 9 to 5 to help us out. So if we could go ahead with the national anthem and then we'll follow with the Pledge of Allegiance. We can go ahead and be seated then as we go through the agenda. I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight. First of all, could I have the approval of the agenda? Could I have a recommendation, please?
I move that the Board of Education approve the agenda as presented.
Support.
We have a recommendation and a second. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Dimick.
Yes.
Miss Cotter.
Yes.
Miss Grisomkowski.
Yes.
Miss Ryan.
Yes.
Miss Dodd.
Yes.
I am a yes. And Mr. Wiseman.
All right, thank you very much.
Motion.
At this point in time, I'm going to make a quick change as it relates to the agenda in order for us to move. Instead of communication reports, items from the Board of Education, we'll lead with recognitions, the Huron Valley Heroes, veteran recognitions. I would like to say that on Veterans Day, we take time to recognize those who have served our nation and the U.S. Armed Forces. We honor their commitment, bravery, and sacrifices to protect the ideas and freedoms we cherish as Americans. We thank all who served in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, Coast Guard, and Merchant Marines. They deserve the support of a grateful nation, and that gratefulness must be reflected in our actions. We also honor the sacrifices made at home by families and loved ones of our service members. This Veterans Day, join us as a Board of Education in Huron Valley Schools in honoring and remembering veteran services in defending the United States at home and abroad. I'd like to go ahead and start. Board of Education, Wilford Wiseman, U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Navy, father of Tom Wiseman. Albert Petroni, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Tom Wiseman. Dean Dodd, U.S. Navy, father-in-law, Laura Dodd. Robert Dodd, U.S. Navy, World War II, grandfather-in-law of Laura Dodd. Robert Christensen, U.S. Army, World War II, grandfather-in-law of Laura Dodd. David Jones, U.S. Army, father of Denise Pastana. Lieutenant Murray Adrian Cotter, World War II, U.S. Army Air Corps, father of Lindsay Cotter. James W. Fields, PFC, U.S. Army, father of Amy Grzynkowski. James W. Fields Jr., Specialist E4, U.S. Army, brother of Amy Grzynkowski. Lincoln Varney, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army, grandfather of Amy Grzynkowski. James C. Fields, Private, U.S. Army, grandfather of Amy Grzynkowski. Corporal Justin Pope, U.S. Marines, Iraq and Afghanistan, brother-in-law of Jacob Dimmick. Next Central Office, Brad Roberts, U.S. Army, HVS, Supervisor of Operations. Joe Davies, U.S. Army, Rosie's handler with Zebra K9. Gary Parrott, U.S. Air Force, father of Jerry Parrott. Joseph Stephen Toth, U.S. Army, father of Jennifer Borkman. James A. Lowe, Jr., U.S. Army, husband of Lori Lowe. James A. Lowe, Sr., U.S. Army, father-in-law of Lori Lowe. Michael Lowe, U.S. Army, brother-in-law of Lori Lowe. Eric Russell, U.S. Coast Guard, brother-in-law of Lori Lowe. Anthony Zizio, U.S. Marine, father-in-law of Colleen Armstrong. Tony Pellerito, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Vicky Pipoli. Phil Morden, U.S. Navy, son-in-law of Vicky Pipoli. Jessica DeFran, U.S. Army, daughter-in-law of Sandy Maggi. Richard Palmer, U.S. Navy, Vietnam, father of Sandy Maggi. Guy Palmer, Army, World War II, grandfather of Sandy Maggi. Matt Supelasa, U.S. Marine, nephew of Joe Supelasa. Lawrence Hegwood, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Barb Rothler. Charles Hegwood, U.S. Army, grandfather of Barb Rothler. Charles Schofield, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Kim Willis. Apollo Early Childhood Center, John Bicknell, U.S. Air Force, husband of Angie Bicknell. Jeffrey Boehm, U.S. Navy, husband of Sonia Boehm. Highland Elementary, Lewis Collins, U.S. Navy, active duty, brother of Tricia Campbell. Vincent L. Lizotte, U.S. Navy, father of Beth Dietrich. William B. Dietrich, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Beth Dietrich. Robert Grandasak, U.S. Army, father of Jamie Page. Nathan Bradley, U.S. Marine Corps, active duty, son of Tracy Bradley. Erling Carlson, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Carrie Sanderson. Thomas R. Roberts, U.S. National Guard, grandfather of Carrie Sanderson. Thomas H. Roberts, Civil War, great-great-grandfather of Carrie Sanderson. William F. Sanderson, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Carrie Sanderson. William Colgrove, U.S. Marine Corps, father-in-law of Kimberly Colgrove. Johnson Elementary, Bill Etchison, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Josh Janak. David Steinbeck, U.S. Navy, father of Kim Freiberg. Harry Fulkinson, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Ken Freiberg. Darrell Kettle, U.S. Army, husband of Doreen Kettle. Cloyd Flagley, U.S. Army Air Force, father of Doreen Kettle. David Mackey, U.S. Navy, father of Ryan Mackey. Frederick Brown III, U.S. Army, father of Chris Brown. Frederick Brown Jr., U.S. Army, grandfather of Chris Brown. Robert Frazier, U.S. Navy, father of Mark Frazier. Alan Witherspoon, U.S. Army, father of Kim Robidoux. Richard Ross Croston, U.S. Army, father of John Croston. Sam Croston, U.S. Navy, grandfather of John Croston. Turn it over to Member Dodd.
Kurtz Elementary, Kim Papchak, U.S. Marine Corps. Kurtz Media Tech. Christopher Papchak, U.S. Air Force, son of Kim Papchak. Stanley Papchak, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Kim Papchak. Rudolph Pertunen, U.S. Army, father of Kathy Kramer. Cameron Nelson, U.S. Army National Guard, father of Jessica Stewart. Brian Gerwalds, U.S. Army Reserves, active duty, husband of Kristen Gerwalds. Jason Cinco, U.S. Army, husband of Julie Cinco. Muir Middle School. Israel Saginaw, U.S. Army, grandfather of Mike Devoren. Stephen Devoren, U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, father of Mike Devoren. Terry Tennant, U.S. Army, Korean War, father of Jamie Halleck. Walter Marsicki, U.S. Army, grandfather of Carrie Bradley. Stuart Proctor, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Carrie Bradley. Kyle Proctor, U.S. Navy, aunt of Carrie Bradley. Douglas Proctor, U.S. Navy, uncle of Carrie Bradley. John Colley Price III, U.S. Army, grandfather of Sherry Lazan. Jerry Blenman, U.S. Army, father of Cherie Lazan. Jeremy Cotter, U.S. Army, brother of Cherie Lazan. Frank J. Strick, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Susie Spilisi. Terrence M. Spilisi, U.S. Army, father of Susie Spilisi. Gary Sawyers, Army Vietnam, father of Stephanie Barris. Joseph Donahue, U.S. Army, grandfather of Jason Donahue. International Academy West. Jeremy Parrott, U.S. Navy, brother of Ryan Parrott. Julie Hengenhold, U.S. Navy, sister-in-law of Ryan Parrott. Joseph Shade, U.S. Navy Construction Battalion, grandfather of Ian Jones. Eugene Jones, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Ian Jones. James Dale Jones, U.S. Marine Corps, uncle of Ian Jones.
Country Oaks Elementary. Arthur Wojciechowski, U.S. Army, uncle of Nancy Williard. Marvin W. Spring, U.S. Army, father of Mitch Spring. Robert A. Spring, U.S. Army, uncle of Mitch Spring. Joe Markey, U.S. Army, active duty, nephew of Doug Markey. John Wittenberg, Air Guard, active duty, son of Linda Lovich. White Lake Middle School. Joseph Kuruski, U.S. Army, grandfather of Nick Peruski. Sylvester Peruski, U.S. Army, grandfather of Nick Peruski. Donald R. McKinley, U.S. Army, father of Carly Barber. Benjamin Ablinski, U.S. Marines, grandfather of Jacqueline Probst. Frederick Navarre, U.S. Army, grandfather of Terry Zonfeld. Thomas Navarre, U.S. Army, uncle of Terry Zonfeld. Philip Crockett, Marines, Vietnam, father of Eric Crockett. Robert Maggard, Army, Vietnam, father-in-law of Eric Crockett. Hank Condon, U.S. Army, World War II, grandfather of Casey Marzak. Kenneth Marzak, U.S. Navy, father-in-law of Katie Marzak. Joshua Fee, Air Force, son of Kathy Fee. John Owen James, U.S. Army, grandfather of Laura Johns. Bernard Lloyd Ellinger, U.S. Army, grandfather of Laura Johns. Roger Lloyd Ellinger, U.S. Army, father of Laura Johns. Terry Lee Ellinger, U.S. Coast Guard, uncle of Laura Johns. James Lloyd Ellinger, U.S. Navy, brother of Laura Johns. Raymond Howard Johns, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Laura Johns. And Johnny Lindo, U.S. Army, cousin of Laura Johns.
Spring Mills Elementary. Tim Dockery, U.S. Navy. Amanda Boatwright, U.S. Military. Tim Bentley, U.S. Army, nephew of Sarah Bentley. Edward Sheldon, U.S. Marines, husband of Julie Sheldon. Paul Gilbert Sheldon, U.S. Marines, father-in-law of Julie Sheldon. Larry West, U.S. Army, father of Julie Sheldon. Gary West, U.S. Marines, uncle of Julie Sheldon. Kurt Sauvé, U.S. Army, nephew of Julie Sheldon. Ken Fauti, U.S. Air Force, active duty, LHS 22 grad, son of Nicole Fauti. Edward Robeson, U.S. Marines, father of Nicole Fauti. George Robeson, U.S. Army, father of Nicole Fauti. John Quinn, U.S. Air Force, father of Lori O'Neill. Steve Schluff, U.S. Army, brother-in-law of Lori O'Neill. David Arndt, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Kristen Arndt. Michael Pompidence, U.S. Army, husband of Rachel Pompidence. Thaddeus Matt, U.S. Army, grandfather of Rachel Pompidence. John McCormick, U.S. Army, grandfather of Rachel Pompidence. Oak Valley Middle School. George Cronin, U.S. Marine Corps, father of Sean Durso. Frank Benedict, U.S. Navy, father of Heather Chowalik. Brett Munster, U.S. Marine Corps, cousin of Sarah Tapley. Mark Smith, U.S. Air Force, brother of Lori Raleigh. John Hathaway, U.S. Army, father of Kathy Adrianson. Robert Day, U.S. Navy, husband of Jennifer Day. Robert Steely Terrell, Jr., U.S. Marine Corps, father of Patricia Terrell. Robert Steely Terrell, Sr., U.S. Navy, grandfather of Patricia Terrell.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize those veterans who have served from our Oxbow Elementary staff. I'd like to recognize Nancy McDougal, U.S. Army, Mitchell Farnham, U.S. Navy, and the son of Carrie Farnham. Andrew Signal, he's the U.S. Marine Corps, currently on active duty, and he's a nephew of Anne Marie Brinkman. Also Raymond Signal, U.S. Army, he's the father of Anne Marie Brinkman. Walter Brinkman, U.S. Navy, father-in-law of Anne Marie. Keith Brinkman, U.S. Air Force, brother-in-law of Anne Marie Brinkman. Also Clarence Duke Cassidy, he's the U.S. Army, father of Dana Abry. Greg Cassidy, U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force Reserves, also the brother of Dana Abry. James Rapp, U.S. Army, father of Emily Richards and uncle to Jennifer Pipkin. Ronald Zinser, U.S. Coast Guard, father of Beth McGinnis. Jeff Black, U.S. Army, father of Melissa Black. Dawn Serrano, U.S. Army, mother of Melissa Black, that's McClellan. And Victor Serrano, U.S. Army, stepfather of Melissa Black. John Kerr, U.S. Air Force, father of Jane K. Skaleski. Tim Dalton, U.S. Marine Corps, father-in-law to Philip Watola. Ronald Borey, U.S. Army, father-in-law to Danielle Borey. Andrew Nowicki, U.S. Army, World War II, grandfather of Danielle Borey. Raymond Burrell, U.S. Marines, grandfather of Danielle. Robert Greenleaf, U.S. Marine Corps, father-in-law to Justine Greenleaf. Daniel Allen, U.S. Army, he's the brother of Nicole Spangler. Doug Spangler, U.S. Marine Corps, father-in-law of Nicole. Also, Earl Warden, U.S. Army, grandfather of Nicole. Patrick Allen, U.S. Navy, great uncle of Nicole. And Robert Fitzpatrick, U.S. Army, grandfather of Nicole Spangler. Also, Roxanne DeBozy, Army National Guard. He's the sister of Lisa DeVore. Jeffrey C. DeBozy, Army National Guard, currently on active duty. He's the nephew of Lisa DeVore. Tyler C. DeBozy, U.S. Army, nephew of Lisa DeVore. Kevin Ryan, U.S. Army, fiance to Neressa Clark. Scott Stanley, U.S. Army. He's the son of Ann Stanley. Donald Zoner, U.S. Navy, father to Heidi Zoner Utterback. Richard Utterback, U.S. Navy, husband of Heidi Zoner Utterback. And Milford Martin, U.S. Army, grandfather of Heidi. And Michael Martin, U.S. Army, also an uncle to Heidi Zoner Utterback. I'd also like to recognize those veterans who have served from Harbor High School. Raymond Denny, U.S. Marines, currently a custodian with Huron Valley Schools at Harbor High. Robert Gerard, U.S. Army, father of Karen Gerard and Meg Macaulay. Mary Ellen Gerard, U.S. Air Force, mother of Karen Gerard and Meg Macaulay. Kenneth E. Kowalski, U.S. Air Force, brother-in-law of Karen Gerard and Meg Macaulay. Henry B. Eggman, U.S. Navy, Purple Heart from Pearl Harbor, uncle of Karen Gerard and Meg Macaulay. Lance Corporal Scott Armstrong, U.S. Marine Corps, currently on active duty, and he's the son of Scott Armstrong. William Armstrong, U.S. Army, father of Scott Armstrong. Richard Smith, U.S. Navy, father of Kelly Vela. Adam Smith, U.S. Navy, brother of Kelly Vela. And now, those representing the families from transportation. Jamie Mush, U.S. Army. Jeffrey Watton, U.S. Air Force. George Roberts, Sr., U.S. Army, father of Jamie Mushish. John Shimitz, U.S. Army, father of Jackie Shimitz. Caleb Haleman, U.S. Air Force, son-in-law of Christy Van. Simon Pilzer, U.S. Army, father of Mary Phipps. David Pilzer, U.S. Army, brother of Mary Phipps. Also, James C. Howe, U.S. Army, father of Janice Walker. Matthew Walker, U.S. Army, husband of Janice Walker. Kirk Hutchinson, U.S. Army, brother-in-law of Janice Walker. Bradley Craig, U.S. Navy, nephew of Janice Walker. James Gillette, U.S. Army, fiancé of the daughter of Janice Walker. William Campbell, U.S. Army, husband of Natalie Campbell. James Campbell, U.S. Marine Corps, father-in-law of Natalie Campbell. Craig Houck, U.S. Navy, brother of Natalie Campbell. Robert Houck, U.S. Air Force, father of Natalie Campbell. Janie Houck, U.S. Navy, sister-in-law of Natalie Campbell. Also, Michael Thomas, U.S. Army, father of Tisha Weber. Richard Manning, U.S. Army, stepfather of Tish. Edward Webner, Coast Guard, father-in-law of Tish Weber. Also, Leon Frederick LaPointe, U.S. Air Force, father of Wendy Coda. George C. Cronin, U.S. Navy, brother of Connie Cicerelli. Robert C. Moran, U.S. Navy, father of Sue Crockett. Gary S. Moran, U.S. Army, uncle of Sue Crockett. Paul E. Moran, U.S. Army, uncle of Sue Crockett. Michael P. Moran, U.S. Army, brother of Sue Crockett. William Spencer, U.S. Army, son-in-law of Amy Curtis. Robert Keller, U.S. Army, father of Amy Curtis. Michelle King, U.S. Air Force, the niece of Candy Pochaha. Richard King, U.S. Air Force, nephew of Candy Pochaha. And Kevin Tunison, U.S. Marines, the brother of Corinne Springer. Thank you.
Lakewood Elementary, Timothy Kerber, U.S. Army, lunch recess staff. James Nored, U.S. Air Force, father of Deb Foose. Michael Ray Nored, U.S. Army, brother of Deb Foose. Earl Nored, U.S. Army, grandfather, Deb Foose. Gregory DeMaio, Army National Guard on active duty, brother of Lisa Anderson. Joe Brewer, U.S. Army, Lakeland graduate, nephew of Patty Turner. Brian Peace, U.S. Army Corps, brother of Laura Buhner. Brendan Peace, U.S. Army Corps Intelligence Specialist, nephew of Laura Buhner. Anthony Sanders, U.S. Navy, father of Sherry Kress. Chet Sanders, U.S. Army, uncle of Sherry Kress. Ben Sinkovich, U.S. Army, uncle of Sherry Kress. Ted Banich, U.S. Army, cousin of Sherry Kress. John Kress, father-in-law of Sherry Kress. Donald Grondin, U.S. Army, grandfather of Lindsay Keeble. George Williams, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Stephanie Williams. Milford High School. Robert Vosk, U.S. Navy, teacher of AP Biology, and National Honor Society. Pete Wheeler, U.S. Marine Corps, MHS Security. Brandy Battersher, U.S. Navy. Emil Mazer, Vietnam veteran, U.S. Army, father of Amanda Bala. Brian McKenna, U.S. Army, brother of Kevin McKenna. Robert Mantella, U.S. Army, father of Marcy Rogers. Christopher Riley, U.S. Navy, husband of Paige Riley. Michael Brooks, U.S. Navy, father of Paige Riley. Daniel Gross, U.S. Army, brother of Dennis Gross. Jerry Cleesby, U.S. Army, father of Elizabeth Carlson. Richard Carlson, U.S. Navy, father-in-law of Elizabeth Carlson. Daniel Johnson, U.S. Army, brother-in-law of Kayleen Robbins. Kelvin Hensler, U.S. Air Force, father-in-law of Kayleen Robbins. James Wensing Sr., U.S. Navy, father of Colleen Darnell. James Wensing Jr., U.S. Navy, brother of Colleen Darnell. Bobby Phillips, U.S. Marine, brother-in-law of Colleen Darnell. Mervyn Darnell, U.S. Air Force, father-in-law of Colleen Darnell. Mark Hoyle, U.S. Navy, husband of Maureen Hoyle. Leonard Kerr Grayson, Navy Korean War, father of Holly Miller. Dean Caldwell, U.S. Army, husband of Jamie Caldwell. Travis Adams, U.S. Army, brother of Jamie Caldwell.
Before I turn it over to Mr. Dimick, I'd like to recognize Mr. Dimick as a retired Coast Guard member of our armed forces. So thank you for your service. Jacob?
Heritage Elementary, David Hall, U.S. Marine Corps, Milford graduate and husband to Tammy Hall. Brian Ratzliff, U.S. Air Force, father to Chrissy Gustafson. Ken Nelson, U.S. Air Force, father of Michelle Brooks. Michael Secord, U.S. Navy, brother of Kim Zale. At Lakeland High School, we have Derek Rupp, U.S. Navy, teaching ELA. Nathaniel Papworth, U.S. Army, active duty, nephew of Lori Langmeyer. Tim DeSorcy, U.S. Navy, brother of Lori Langmeyer. Michael Ellis, U.S. Air Force, father-in-law of Scott Rolando. Daryl Holly, U.S. Navy, cousin of Scott Rolando. Peter Rolando, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Scott Rolando. Arthur Del Torre, U.S. Army, great-grandfather of Scott Rolando. Michael Clone, U.S. Army, uncle to Wendy Keekley. Everett Held, U.S. Marines, father to Libby Held. Nick Young, U.S. Navy, brother-in-law to Libby Held. Jeff Held, U.S. Army, brother to Libby Held. Aaron Beal, U.S. Army, active duty, nephew to Libby Held. Jonathan View, U.S. Army, partner to Libby Held. David Hike, U.S. Marines, father to Michelle Lytham. Mark Woods, U.S. Army, Vietnam, stepdad to Timothy Johnson. Kenneth Lawler Sr., World War II Navy, grandfather to Timothy Johnson. Brian McKenna, U.S. Army, brother of Kevin McKenna. Ronald Mantella, U.S. Army, father of Marcy Rogers. Christopher Riley, U.S. Navy, husband of Paige Riley. Michael Brooks, U.S. Navy, father of Paige Riley. Daniel Gross, U.S. Army, brother of Dennis Gross. Gary Cleesby, U.S. Army, father of Elizabeth Carlson. Richard Carlson, U.S. Navy, father-in-law of Elizabeth Carlson. Daniel Johnson, U.S. Army. Sorry, little mistake there, but Roger A. White, U.S. Army, uncle of Tammy Jeanette. George Butch White, U.S. Army, uncle of Tammy Jeanette. George White, U.S. Army, grandfather of Tammy Jeanette. Donald V. Jeanette, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Tammy Jeanette. Donald V. Jeanette, U.S. Marines, brother-in-law of Tammy Jeanette. James Heafy, U.S. Navy, brother of Meredith Johnston. Kimberly Heafy, U.S. Navy, sister-in-law of Meredith Johnston. Edward Heafy, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Meredith Johnston. Ralph Conflitti, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Meredith Johnston. Thomas Johnston, U.S. Army, father-in-law of Meredith Johnston. David P. Miller, U.S. Marines, father of Karen Miller. Elia Seacrest, West Point Maps, grandfather of Regina Stephenson. Scott Keith, U.S. Navy, brother of Colleen Durham. James Maynard, U.S. Navy, grandfather of Colleen Durham. Scott Carney, U.S. Navy, active duty, son of Luz Carney. Thomas Carney, U.S. Navy, active duty, son of Lou Carney.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Board of Education members, in honoring those individuals as recognized by the board and recognized by family members, and also recognition of service by employees of partners of Huron Valley. Once again, it's important for us to all recognize that we not only honor our veterans, but we also honor the sacrifices that have been made by family members and loved ones of our service members over the years. With that, I'd like to thank our members of the Color Guard. You play a very important part in this evening's celebration and remembrance of our veterans. So if everyone could please rise as we honor our veterans.
Hands up. Raise colors. Right face. Forward march.
Once again, thank you very much for our Honor Guard. They play such an important role in our community, in our school district, and we see them quite often in the same faces at each of our events, so they certainly are part of our family. With that, a couple things. We'll move back to items from the Board President. Citizens participation forums, and we always talk about this. This is an opportunity for us to say thank you for attending our Huron Valley Board of Education meetings. We always welcome our Huron Valley community's input and comments. There is a public segment available for comments, 15 minutes, which include both action and non-actions during section 3. And there's also additional comments that are available under section 7 of the agenda as it relates to non-agenda items. If you have any comments and concerns, please fill out this form and pass it on to our administrative assistant, Heather Cadell, over here. Heather, you over here. And we appreciate this. This is an opportunity for you to make comments. It's really not an opportunity for us to get into a dialogue. But that being said, though, since the last time we met, our Board of Education, I want to first say thank you to each and every one of you. We had an opportunity back on October 23rd and 24th to have a community forum. And all of the Board of Education members had an opportunity to participate, and they did participate in those 2 nights. One was at Heritage, and the other one was at Lakewood. How could I have forgotten? At Lakewood. And I do want to thank and recognize our community members that came forth. The board, like I said, held these 2 community forums. It really gave our community an opportunity to speak one-on-one with us. At the same time, I just want to reiterate that members of our Board of Education are absolutely student-focused and strive to always provide the best educational opportunities for all of our students. We truly believe in inspiring and building futures one student at a time. As part of that commitment, your Board of Education needs to hear from our community. This may be accomplished by participating in our board meetings like tonight in person or remotely, visiting our district website, our community, or communicating directly with your Board of Education or administration. At the same time, we feel that this community forum provides another avenue for community members to voice their concerns, ideas, and opinions, and we certainly respect and appreciate our community's participation on those 2 nights. We truly want to hear from our community, and we feel that our community needs to feel invested in the district, whether they have children attending our districts or not. This is an essential aspect of building a strong and vibrant educational environment. A striving school district leads to a flourishing community. The board, our board, will plan on holding another community forum in the spring to continue providing another platform for youth as it relates to open discussion to help foster that culture of collaboration, trust, and shared responsibility, which are crucial elements for the sustained growth and success of the Huron Valley School District. With that, I do not believe, Superintendent Salah, we have any school presentations, so I'll turn it over to you for Superintendent Communication. Unless, yeah, if it's all right with the board, I see Mr. Baker over here, and he is one of our student leaders. He's our leader at Lakeland High School, and maybe we should hear from Mr. Baker before we hear from Dr. Salah. How about that?
Gotcha. Hello, members of the board. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be able to speak at these events. I'd like to start out by acknowledging the veterans and thanking them for their service. As an American, it's a great honor to be able to honor them. And speaking on Lakeland, we have a veteran ceremony on Wednesday put on by Mr. Brian Howe and helped out by the AP government class. So that's a big deal for us, and that's a good deal that Lakeland students can be able to honor those members. Speaking of another big thing going on at Lakeland, on December 7th, we have our Holiday Hope for Kids event, which is for special education kids throughout the Oakland County area. And currently we are sending out letters to businesses asking for fundraising because we have to buy around 300 presents for these kids. And it's basically an all-day event, and it's really nice that we get to interact with these people and just have a good time. It's basically an all-day Christmas party, holiday party, and should be a good time. I'd like to acknowledge our success in sports, particularly cross country, winning in both boys and girls regionals and having a successful state. I'd also like to acknowledge Lakeland football beating Milford twice. Besides that, last month homecoming went good. Everything's been good for us. We're adjusting well to the new building reservations. And any questions?
Any questions, any comments from any board members? Yes, Amy?
Thank you for acknowledging the cross-country team. I appreciate that. But with respect to your Holiday Hope for Kids, how can people donate?
So basically right now you can send a check in the mail to Lakeland High School. And right now it's headed by Mr. Scott Rolando and Mr. Brad Farquhar, our leadership teacher. And they are heading it right now, and they're doing a great job. So if you want to send any money, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Any other comments? I do want to mention, Paul, that Paul is one of the members, a key member of our Teaching, Learning, Technology Subcommittee. And I know Mrs. Pastana, as the chairperson, certainly appreciates your input along with the other student leaders. So this is not just a one and done. We call on you to work with us so that we can hear what's going on at the high schools and for you to provide some guidance and input. So we certainly respect and appreciate your input. I do not see any other questions. I know that tomorrow is an early day for you, so you can certainly stay, but oh, it's not an early day. Well, wait a minute. Do they have school tomorrow?
No school tomorrow.
Well, then I think he should stay the whole day. Maybe this should be a vote. Does that even have a? There's no motion, so I think you could sneak out. All right?
Thank you very much.
But good point, though. That's a very good point. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yep, take care. Have a good evening.
Bye.
But you can stay.
We should have made you stay.
Thank you. Now we'll turn it over to Dr. Salah.
Thank you, President Wiseman. Good evening to everybody who's here in the audience and to those who are watching at home or those who will watch this tomorrow. I would like to echo some of the sentiments already shared. Just thank you to our veterans. We are incredibly grateful for your service to our country. Freedom is not free, and I certainly count my blessings every day when I think about the men and women who have served across the multiple branches of the military. Huron Valley is a special place for a lot of reasons, but it's really extraordinary. I've been here for 5 years now. The number of veteran ceremonies that take place across the district is not typical. You do not see that in a lot of places, and just so grateful to our buildings for recognizing the importance of recognizing our veterans, and they do an outstanding job doing that. So thank you, our veterans. I would also like to echo Paul's sentiments regarding cross country. I know we have a cross country mom here on the board, and she was beaming when I walked in to the board meeting this evening. Quite an accomplishment for both boys and girls. And finally, tomorrow. So we do have tomorrow is a voting day. However, our staff will be hard at work. We have professional learning for our professional staff, and they will be engaged in a lot of activities across the district in terms of improving their craft and examining best practices for how they meet the needs of students every single day on behalf of our families. So with that, my one formal item this evening, if we could cue up the presentation, I wanted to spend a few minutes, as I have for the past several meetings, talking about our strategic plan 2.0 work. Work has been ongoing and it continues. It started actually, believe it or not, back in June of 23. I mean, really, it started even before that, and with the first iteration of strategic planning. Strategic Plan 2.0, as you've heard me share on several occasions, is really focused on the first. So our goal with this part of the work has been around primarily, first and foremost, collecting the data to really know what problem that we have to be solved. To ensuring that we're putting dollars in the right place, meaning in the innovative programming. So if we're paying for brick and mortar, those are dollars that cannot be spent on students. So that has been our mission, our focus as a part of these discussions. 3, communicate extensively. I think those who have been part of this work in the district in the past can say with confidence that we have been extraordinarily transparent, and we will continue to be transparent in putting every single presentation out there for the community to watch and ask questions, let alone the 50 individuals from across the community that are involved in this work. And I would say that of the 50, 13 of them are parents. So that parent voice is critical. 2 of them are students. Paul Baker is a part of that committee, as well as a representative from Milford High School. Because as it relates to this work, our goal is to engage the community in a thoughtful process based upon the data so that we can enhance programs for students, not for the next 2 years or 5 years, but we're talking about visioning out, in some instances, decisions that could impact the next 50 years of the Huron Valley schools, especially when it comes to, the physical plant of our school district. So let's see if this works here. Yeah, no luck. They never work. So you're going to drive for me, okay, Rose? So the agenda, we had at our last meeting, we had a recap of the meeting before. And what's important about that is Plant Moran Real Point really touched on the key takeaways based upon the data being enrollment, the data being percent utilized. So this percent that our buildings are utilized on a building by building basis. And then the third data point really looking at is the building assessment. So how much will it cost to update our buildings to a standard that is absolutely essential in this day and age, not only from an instructional perspective, but also from a physical plant perspective. It's really hard to have school when heat doesn't work, and when you don't have air conditioning, and when your bathrooms are sort of falling apart. Those are really important ingredients. And in this day and age, safety and security is obviously a absolute essential aspect of our operation and really impacts every decision that we make. So we heard a recap from meeting 4 with the key takeaways. I spent some time talking about something we call the probabilities. So the problems that we have to solve as a result of the data. And we like to look at those problems as opportunities because that's a more positive way of framing a problem. So we call them probabilities. The third point that we talked about really related to parameters. So as a result, so distilling down from the data to the key takeaways from the third-party entity that we hired to help us do this work to the probabilities that we had to solve, what parameters do we need to put in place? And I'm going to walk through those this evening so that our listening audience that's present as well as those that are watching knows exactly what we talked about. And then we walk through 4 scenarios as a result of all that information that fit the problems to be solved and all the data points. And then we did something called a SWOT analysis, which is essentially a way for us to gather feedback from that group of 50 people that were there. We gave them each of the scenarios. We asked them to talk about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and really help us wrap our minds around what themes were going to emerge so that we get closer to a final recommendation. And then we left the meeting with respect to some dates and times of our next meeting. So just to recap the meeting, I shared this at our last Board of Education meeting, and I'm going to walk through them rather quickly here. So if we can move to the next slide. Next slide after that. So proposed key takeaways, and these were from our third-party entity, Plant Moran Real Point, that they developed as a result of the data that was collected. First and foremost, early childhood center should remain, and that we should consider a satellite early childhood center in the future because there is demand in the district, and frankly, there is legislation on the horizon in terms of discussions around universal pre-K. So we know we have the square footage. So where might that sit in the district? Recommendation was to continue with our current grade configurations because frankly, they wouldn't solve our utilization challenges. Recommendation was to maintain 8 JK through 5 elementary buildings, 2 6-8, 2 9-12 comprehensive high schools, along with that continuing to maintain Harbor High School and the International Academy West, as well as our adult education programming. So if we go to the next slide, additional considerations from Plant Moran Real Point that the Huron Valley Schools should consider scenarios that reduce the total number of buildings. And that's what we spent the lion's share of our time talking about at the last meeting, and repurposing 2019 bond dollars in a way that we could spend them on buildings that would remain open, right? It makes sense to not spend dollars on a building that might be repurposed and just really being intentional and thoughtful, not to use taxpayer money in a way that would be wasteful. Plant Moran Real Point also proposed drafting scenarios. As I mentioned, we did that at the last meeting. They also encouraged the district, our Huron Valley team, to start applying some costs to the innovative programming. So we've been working on that. That's a labor of love. It's kind of challenging, right, John? We're trying to work through, it's hard to quantify some of those things, and it depends on how grandiose or how big you go as it relates to some of those programs and initiatives. So, and then finally, in accordance with the strategic plan, there was encouragement for us to start redrawing boundary lines to feed into 2 feeder tracks. So one Lakeland track for the east side of the district and one Milford track for the west side of the district. So we are starting to dabble with what that might look like. So moving on to the next section, which is issues to highlight or resolve. So each one of these bullet points has its own slide, so I won't spend a lot of time talking through each one of them, but we are going to talk about the fact that we have too many buildings. We have a very old, challenging administration building. We have a Brooks Center that is additional square footage that is aging and needs some attention and some work. We have this beautiful facility that we're in tonight, Milford High School's capacity, something we have to talk about. Oak Valley Middle School, something we have to talk about. Muir Middle School, something we need to talk about. Our boundaries, district boundaries, are something we have to talk about, because every decision we make could have an unintended consequence as it relates to enrollment. And so I just want the public and the community in particular to understand that it's not as easy as just do X or just do Y, because X or Y might have an extreme impact that we might not want to see. I mentioned universal pre-K as a possibility, and then high school feeder tracks. So if we move to the next slide, we have too many buildings, we have too few students. This is not a Huron Valley issue. This is a state of Michigan issue. This is a national issue. We've seen declining birth rates for years. I would encourage you, if you've not had an opportunity to watch the second strategic plan video, Plaint Moran, Rail Point does an extensive presentation regarding what we can expect our enrollment to look like. They talk about birth trends. They talk about construction trends in the community. You might see a huge development going up in the community and say, well, that will solve the enrollment challenges that the district is facing. And the reality is that people just are not having the same number of children that they've had historically. So the average household might produce a half of a child, whereas in the past it was 1.5 children. So I don't know how the math works on that, but it works somehow when you calculate it all together. So continuing on, just with the same theme, too many buildings. So overall, if you look at our overall utilization at the secondary level in particular, we are woefully underutilizing our spaces. Oak Valley is, as an example, I think I was looking at this today, they're at like 51% capacity, 51% utilized. Muir, I think, is closer to 63, 64% utilized. White Lake is 57, and Milford is 55% utilized. These are challenges that we cannot just continue to ignore. We spend $7 to $10 a square foot on space that we do not use. So multiply that by the number of square footage that we have in the district. One of our middle schools, as an example, is 100,000 square feet. Multiply $7 to $10 a square foot by 100,000. That gives you a sense of how many hundreds of thousands of dollars that we are not spending on students and student programming every year to heat and cool and clean buildings. So we have some of the numbers on there as well. Again, this is meeting number 2 for those of you who are interested in the enrollment information. Actually, I'm sorry. This is the utilization information is meeting number 3. So, and all of this is on our website. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Moving on to the next. So the administration building. The administration building was built in 1967. Some of you may not know this out there in the community, but we have 3 portables that are from the 2001 and the 2001 bond that were supposed to be a temporary solution that have now been there for 22 years. It's really hard to do business in portables from a technology perspective. I mean, just the wildlife that gets underneath those portables. I'm not joking, like scratching, in people's offices underneath, and you're worried that a raccoon's going to pop his head up at some point in one of those buildings. So it's a challenge. And our goal has not been to spend money on the administration building because we want to spend money on classrooms and buildings and our instructional spaces, which is why we all exist. So the cost to renovate that space is about $9.3 million. That's a problem that we need to solve. It's a problemtunity. Continuing on, the Brooks Center, built in 1956, cost to renovate at this point is $16.4 million. And so if you're interested in some of those numbers, that was meeting number 4, where we went through a building assessment. Every building, Plant Moran Rail Point provided the specific data and the numbers regarding how they arrived at those conclusions after walking every one of our facilities and looking at our infrastructure. They assigned priorities, 1 to 3 years, 5 to 7, 8 to 10, and what that price tag would look like. Oak Valley Milford High School. As I mentioned, Milford High School is, I think I'm out of order here, but Milford High School, 55% utilized. That's the challenge. I'm good. That's the challenge to be solved. That becomes one of our parameters that I'll share in just a couple of minutes. We will never be a one high school district. At least I don't believe we will be in the next 20, 30 years, unless something drastic were to happen. I don't really see it happening in 20 or 30 years from now. No one has a crystal ball, but we are 100 square miles. It would be very difficult for us to try to go to one high school, and frankly, we would lose hundreds and hundreds of students overnight if we tried to consolidate into one. And we need to be mindful of that and the impact it would have on the community. So that being said, we have a lot of space in this building, and we have to come up with a way to utilize that square footage. So next slide. Next slide is Oak Valley Middle School. So Oak Valley is centrally located in the district. It was built in 1994. It has about $24.3 million in renovation costs. It is our newest middle school and is our second newest building. So it's a beautiful building. So we need to take that into consideration as we're making these decisions. The next slide is Muir. Muir is our oldest middle school, built in 1964, and its price tag is about $34.4 million. That, for people who do not know, that building is still on steam heating. It has extraordinary costs associated and needs in order to get it up to the standard that we would expect in Huron Valley Schools. So our next slide speaks to a problemtunity that relates to protecting our boundaries. We learned from the closure of Highland Middle School years and years ago that, with that closure, we lost a number of students to Heartland. It was a lot more convenient for families just to drive down the street to Heartland. And so by closing a building, we have to be thoughtful as it relates to districts that are near to us, because there could be an unintended consequence if we aren't thoughtful and make the right call. So for some context here, for those who are living in the northwest quadrant of the district, it's about a 14-minute drive to Heartland Middle School. Oak Valley is 16 minutes. Muir is 11 minutes. Milford High School is 7 minutes for some context and why we're looking at that. So next opportunity, again, is this potential of universal pre-K. The reason that this is a opportunity is because right now it's not law that we require universal pre-K, but if it becomes a law that we are required to provide that, we would need space, and we don't currently have space dedicated, and the Apollo Center is not large enough to accommodate 300 to 400 more early childhood students. So we would have to come up with solutions for that. And then our next slide is the high school feeder tracks. And what you see here, if you go to our website, the actual strategic plan is listed. And this was one of the findings and or recommendations that emerged from the strategic plan that was adopted by the board in December of 22. And it says, investigate and consider aligning JK-12 building paths as feeders with east side and the community feeding, with the east side of the community feeding to Lakeland High School and the west side of the community feeding to Milford High School. So if you go to the next slide, what I'm really trying to illustrate here is the process. Started with the data, that then turned into key takeaways or recommendations from the third party entity we hired. They brought forward some key takeaways or considerations for us as a school district. They've done this work in dozens of other places, and these were their recommendations. From those key takeaways, we developed the problems and or opportunities that we needed to solve. And now we're distilling it down further into the parameters that in order to accomplish the key takeaways and the problems that we have to be solved, we have to have parameters to help us build scenarios. And so the overarching parameters are the slide that you're looking at here. And one, we have to maximize opportunities for students. That has to be our drive. That has to be our focus. That's our vision. That's our mission. That always needs to remain at the front of our minds. In order to do that, we need to save annual operations and maintenance dollars on these brick and mortar buildings and dedicate those dollars to pay for innovative programs. Feeder tracks make sense as it relates to 8 elementary, 2 middle, 2 traditional high schools. Protecting district enrollment and boundaries, that has to be a parameter. Determining unique location identity for Harbor. So while we're talking about the Brooks Center being an aged building that requires $16.4 million, we also recognize that for the instructional integrity of the students that are in our Harbor program, in our adult education program, they thrive best when they are not in a traditional high school. We've seen that, we've not only seen that here, but that is true. And if you study the research or look at any program that has an alternative type school, they try to separate it from the general population, the traditional population, because students typically came from that population, and it's hard for them to see their peers across the hallway when they're in a different program. And so we just that is a non-negotiable or a parameter for us. Close Brooks to reduce square footage and save dollars. Close the administration building to reduce square footage and save dollars. Confirm and affirm that in order to uphold the feeder tracks, it makes sense that the White Lake Middle School would remain as one of the 2 middle schools. And that's why it is recommended as a parameter here to stay open. Increased utilization of Milford High School. We've got to come up with a solution. We have this beautiful building. We're going to have 2 high schools. That's a parameter. So that means we need to figure out a way to better utilize the space. Ensure that the district has flexibility and resources to react to future demographic or legislative changes. That's the universal pre-K piece. Make the district a destination for students, families, and staff, and set the district up for the next generation and beyond, not just 5 years, but thinking even beyond that. And then with all of these scenarios, and frankly, regardless of these scenarios, if you watch the number 5 meeting, you will have heard me say this about 10 different times. Regardless of what we do, we have to pass another bond. The needs when we passed the bond in 2019 were vast. And I'm going to walk through some of that in the next slide. So if we move on to the next slide. So this just gives you a chronological view of the bond landscape for the Huron Valley Schools. Last time we passed a bond for major infrastructure improvement was 2001. And that was largely that went to make our high schools competitive with the field houses. Like about half or over half of the bond dollars at the time were spent on the 2 field houses at the high schools. So in 2018, when we brought the Building Features Committee together and we went through this similar exercise of doing a building assessment, there were $400 million in 2018 that were identified in needs across all of our buildings. We passed the bond for $182 million, and we passed a sinking fund that at the time was generating about $2 million. Now it's closer to $2.5 million because property values have gone up annually. And so the sinking fund is a 10-year ballot proposal, and it will expire, in 2029. So in total, that gives you over 10 years about $200 million. We needed $400 million 5 years ago. So, and as I'm sure those who are watching this, anyone who's done a project at their home, and if you've paid for lumber or any materials to help you complete that project, you will have noticed a significant increase in the cost to complete that work. We've seen as a school district about a 40 to 50% escalation in costs just to complete the projects that were planned for in 2018. And frankly, I'm really proud of the work we've done. We've done a pretty amazing job, and we're still on target to fulfill the vast majority of each and every one of those projects. And this room is evidence of that. Every time we come in here, it looks better and better. They add a new piece towards its completion. So $400 million 2018, passed the bond 2019 for $182 million. We sold it in 2 series so that we could take advantage of the market as it existed at the time. What's not on here is we also refinanced some bonds, saving the taxpayers about $2 million. So that gets paid off more quickly. So we've been good stewards of previous bonds in the past. And with this current assessment that was done, there are additional $436 million worth of needs over the next 10 years still remain. That's regardless of anything that we do with these scenarios that are being proposed. So we will very likely be asking the board, actually in the very near future, it will be my recommendation to our Board of Education that they consider supporting us going out for another 0 tax rate increase bond. That's been something that we have been talking about ever since we passed the last one. Is we don't want to take to the taxpayers an increase, but if we can just maintain the current debt mill. In this instance, if we do a 20-year bond, it will generate $360 million that we can begin collecting as early as 2026. And the reason why I'm saying sooner than later to our board, and we haven't talked a lot about this, but I'm sharing it here with our Board of Education, with the community. The reason why I'm saying sooner than later is because while we still have the current bond, we have probably 50 or 60 million left in the current bond. There are the process as it relates to bidding, as it relates to architectural design, is very lengthy. Just the design part of adding new spaces to a facility could take 6 months to a year. And as you'll see in the scenarios, one of the proposals is to build a new middle school. That will take a year or more. So if we were to go out sooner than later and maintain the current debt mill, wouldn't increase anybody's tax rate. It would allow us to start the planning side of that work and get a year jump on the projects. And so we'd be able to complete the work more quickly, and our residents and our students will be able to enjoy not only the benefits of the facilities, but also the benefits of the innovative programs that we'll be able to do as a result of some of these scenarios. So that kind of walks you through where we are today. And then if we move to the next slide, just walking quickly through these scenarios, there are 4 scenarios that were proposed. The first, scenario A, is close Oak Valley Middle School, remodel Muir Middle School and White Lake Middle School, and repurpose Oak Valley. Now, the reason why repurposing Oak Valley would be important, the reason why, there are these details here is if you think back to the opportunities, our goal was to check as many of those boxes as possible. So by repurposing Oak Valley, it's our newest middle school, we still get to use that really nice facility that benefits students for as long as we have the space. So to get into some detail, so we would, in this scenario, close Oak Valley Middle School and consolidate into White Lake and Muir Middle Schools. We'd consolidate into Oak Valley the Harbor Alternative Program, the Adult Transition Program, which is a special needs program that's currently housed at Milford High School, as well as programming for Community Rec and Ed. I know that Community Rec and Ed is important to the community, and if we can find a space, a gym space, and some outdoor space to help meet the needs of that program without constantly having to compete with the high schools, that would be nice. And without having to interact as much with students, because that's one of our challenges from a safety perspective is we want to keep the adult population separate from our student population. Close, demo, sell the Brooks site, renovate Muir and White Lake with remaining bond dollars, and that would just get us started at those sites. We would still have, some more to do with the next bond. And also, as I mentioned, if we do have legislation that requires additional pre-K, we could look at that on the Oak Valley site as a possibility. The next scenario B is the opposite of A. It's close Muir Middle School, remodel Oak Valley Middle School and White Lake Middle School, and repurpose Muir. So again, going through bullet by bullet, you would close Muir and consolidate White Lake and Oak Valley. You would consolidate into Muir for Harbor, ATP, Community Rec and Ed. You demo the administration building and consolidate into Milford High School. So just walking through these, if you think with me back to those opportunities, by closing the administration building and moving it into Milford High School, it increases the capacity to closer to 70, 75%. So then we're not as worried about the space sitting, close to half empty. It solves that problem for the long term. It allows us to use another site for these other programs. Scenario C is close Oak Valley Middle School, build a new middle school at the Milford campus, and repurpose Oak Valley. So, the conversations at the last strategic plan meeting there's a lot of excitement about C, I would say. I'm not saying that a final decision was made, but there was definitely some themes and traction that emerged, especially as it relates to being able to do some things from a programming perspective. So by having a middle school on the Milford High campus, there are things that we can't do now that we would be able to do. Shared staffing, which means more elective opportunities for students that they currently don't have access to. Because enrollment is lower in these buildings, we're having to post positions that are partial positions. So if you post a 0.4 ceramics class at the secondary level, it's really hard to find somebody that wants to teach 2 classes and come in, 2 hours a day at the high school. But if you have buildings that are in closer proximity to one another, you could post a 1.0 art position. They could teach 2 sections of ceramics at the high school and then teach 3 sections of art at a middle school. So there was some excitement around the coursework and the types of programs that we might be able to offer. There's some opportunities as it relates to tier 2 busing. Again, that could be a cost savings and allows us to spend more dollars on things like career tech ed, gifted and talented programming, all the things that we've talked about. Also, one of the excitement pieces around some of the conversations in the room was around a start time. We've been talking about the fact that the research tells us that high school students start school probably a little too early, and this would allow us some flexibility in terms of start time. So, and then the last scenario is D, and it is close Oak Valley Middle School, build a new middle school at Muir, and repurpose Oak Valley. And so, the conversations around this one was keeping a middle school on the same campus, even though we would avoid, we would still expend the dollars to build a new middle school, but because Muir is our oldest and has significant needs, there was some talk around that. And I guess I would go back to A for a moment. There was talk about, the village feel, and having a school that remains in the village and is walkable. So our homework at this point is really to dig deeply into the themes, and we've started to do that. Looking at how many walkers do we have at the Muir campus? I mean, we hear about it being a walking building, but how many kids are transported? I mean, it's an important question that we really need to dig into. One of the things we've been talking about is the walkability to the village from the Milford High School campus. One of the things we're exploring is there a way with a future bond, to build an 8-foot walkway that is safe and gets us from this campus to the village. So we're unpacking every one of those questions. We're unpacking the themes that were raised, the pros and the cons, and the strengths and the opportunities, and that we will unpack at the next meeting on November 29th. I went really long. The last slide, sorry, Laura, I know. Laura's agreeing that I went really long. So just finally, all 4 scenarios save significant general fund dollars over the next 10 years. Also could have a tremendous impact on instructional programs. Regardless of the scenario selected, the district will need to pass a future bond in order to address the capital needs of $430 million plus. Again, all these presentations are available online. And you can email any questions that you have to communications@hvs.org. If you go to our website, scroll to the bottom in the lower left-hand corner, if you just click on the icon that says ask a question, you can pose a question. I just responded to one today. So we are getting some questions. We would love to hear from you. And that's enough from me this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's important to note that we have, based on the strategic plan, there's a meeting coming up at the end of September, right, Dr. Slav? That's November. Geez, I'm going back to September. November. And then we're going to have 2 board meetings sandwiched with a town hall meeting to discuss this.
So November 29th is the next strategic plan meeting. December 4th is the first board meeting where I expect the recommendation to be presented. December 11th, we'll have a town hall, and then December 18th, we'll ask the board to take action on one of the recommendations based upon all that feedback.
And the original schedule for board meetings in December was December 4th with another board meeting on the 11th. What we've done is kept the 4th, moved the next board meeting to the 18th so that we can facilitate a town hall meeting, one topic, the strategic plan 2.0 on December 11th, correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right, thank you. Look forward to it. Thank you very much. Associations communication.
If I was in the classroom right now, I'd say we need a stretch break. I promise, or this is my shortest association comment of the year. Good evening. Tonight, we honor the veterans in our Huron Valley School staff families. It always amazes me each year how many brave men and women connected to Huron Valley have given their time, energy, and dedication to defend our nation. My father, father-in-law, and grandfather all served in the Army, and I had the privilege of hearing many stories through the years of their experiences and sacrifices. We are grateful to all these veterans, and we are also grateful to all of the educators who taught them the reading, writing, math, science, history, and life skills that were needed for them to successfully complete the jobs and missions that were assigned to them. The skills of our students who learn now will be with them in whatever careers they choose. I'm sure that some of them will choose the route of armed services, and our educators will be incredibly proud of them as they utilize the skills that they learned in Huron Valley to keep our nation safe and work for peace around the world. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Board correspondence, Secretary Pestana.
None tonight.
Treasurer's report, Treasurer Grzymkowski.
None tonight.
Reports from the board committee. First one is executive committee. The executive committee met on October. And the meeting was called to order at 9:21. President were myself, along with Member Dodd, Member Pestana, Dr. Sla, Jeanette Wenger, Barbara Rothler, and Heather Cadell. There were no public comments. The regular agenda. First item was discussed was the November 6th board meeting, which is being held tonight. We also reviewed administrative guidelines 3,000 and 9,000. Dr. Salah presented those, and we will be reviewing them. And our second review will occur at our next meeting on November 17th. Ms. Wenger provided an overview of an update of benefits that we found very helpful as it relates to all the bargaining units for the calendar year 2024. Ms. Rothler highlighted the October as School Safety Month, and she also shared a new safety presentation that was developed for 4th and 5th grade students that has updated age-appropriate language and materials as it relates to school safety and security. Handle with Care. Handle with Care was also presented by Ms. Rothler. It's a new pilot program in the Huron Valley that has been asked as a beta site for open schools due to our strong relationship with our first responders and law enforcement. This program is run in conjunction with local law enforcement, alerting buildings when a student has been involved in an event that needs not only their attention, but possibly ours. Live stream, there was a discussion as it relates to the current live stream procedures of the Board of Education meetings. Committee discussed that this platform is utilized as a way of transparency and providing an opportunity for our district to reach out to the community. We also discussed board policy 31-1. Dr. Slaw presented a new board policy, Neola 1540, that has been recommended by Neola, our policymaker, advisor, and we'll continue to have dialogue regarding that. The adjournment occurred at 11:03. Our next meeting, as I said before, was November 17th, 2023 at the administrative offices at 9 a.m. Next is TLT committee.
Before I read our TLT minutes, I just wanted to say a thank you to our TLT team. You guys have put together some great presentations at strategic plan as well as in our committee meeting, and it doesn't go unnoticed, the hard work and the level of excellence you guys provide, so thank you. We met on October 17th at the administration building. Meeting was called to order at 4:35. Present were myself, Ms. Cotter, Mr. Wiseman filled in, Mr. DeVernier, Dr. Salah, Mr. Lindbergh, Ms. Thompson, Ms. Bjorkman, Dr. Nemeth, Ms. Horowitz, and then we had our three students, Paul, Priyanka, and Rowan. There was no public comment. Regular agenda items, Mr. Lindbergh updated the committee with an overview of the 5-phase curriculum development review cycle, including evaluating planning, revising development, implementing, monitoring, and reviewing. At the elementary, the teams are continuing the focus this year on evaluating literacy resources and while implementing new science materials and conducting a global review of reading and writing K through 5. Our middle schools are beginning a review of the ELA curriculum, evaluating math materials, implementing new curriculum and resources in social studies, and implementing new assessments in science. At the high school level, the focus is on geometry and algebra 1 and 2, the experienced chemistry resource, and piloting a biology resource, and implementing a new curriculum in U.S. history, economics, and senior government. Dr. Nemeth also gave an update on the junior kindergarten to 5 report card pilot. The district is working with teachers in every building and grade on parent-friendly report cards that will better show student progress. TLT will bring this work back as an agenda item at a future meeting. We talked about, Mr. Tavernier provided the first set of administrative guidelines as part of the 5,000 series. Additional guidelines from the 2,000 and 5,000 will be shared over the next few meetings. The student leaders discussed the recent upcoming activities, including Spirit Days, Homecoming, I'll mention tonight, Holiday Hope for Kids, Milford's Unified Basketball Team, Milford Miracles, and the IA's Tri-Campus Dodgeball Tournament. Lakeland and Milford student leaders attended the strategic plan meeting, which they found very interesting and appreciated the comprehensive review and seeing the work behind the scenes. A brief update was given on handheld radios, camera placement, and the focus on cybersecurity under our safety and security. The district safety committee meeting was going to meet on that same day, October 17th. Nothing on the consent agenda, no other. We adjourned at 5:34. Our next meeting is tomorrow at 4:30, and it will be at Lakeland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pastana. Finance and Operations.
Finance and Operations met on Wednesday, November 1st at 8 o'clock at the Administration Building. From the board, Mr. Wiseman was there, Ms. Ryan, and myself. From Administration, Dr. Salah, Mr. Van Gotham, Mr. Reeve, Ms. Kerrigan, Ms. Maruskin, and from Clark Construction, Ms. Timberlake, Mr. Maxwell, and from TMP, Bill Weinrock. We did not have any public comment. We do not have any consent agenda items this evening. We have a lot of unfinished business. Tonight, we will be voting on the approval contract for Bid Pack 12, which is the Duck Lake asbestos abatement, as well as the contract for Bid Pack 12 Duck Lake Center demolition. In addition, we will be looking for approval for the Droplet software purchase. And then this evening, we also will be talking about some additional new business that will also require us to vote, including the emergency repair steam boiler at Muir Middle School. The committee discussed Muir's boiler issues and how they are currently down to one working boiler. The contractor recommends replacement of all the tubes in the boiler so there isn't a chance of failure later. Administration is asking for approval this evening of the proposal from the DJ Conley in the amount of $68,005, dated October 26, 2023, with a 12% contingency in the amount of $8,600 and $81.60, for a total amount of $76,165. This project is going to be funded through the 2019 Bond and Sinking Fund. Safety and security updates. Dr. Salah spoke of the most recent Oxford tragedy newspaper articles and reiterated how robust the HVS threat assessment process is and continues to be throughout the district. There has been a recent trend in threat assessments, so this remains top of the mind for HVS. Staff training on Run, Hide, Fight runs every 2 years and is being offered via video to new staff members and on alternate years, all requiring sign-off for record's sake. In addition, we had updates for all of our bid packs from Clark Construction. They provided the committee with an update of the remaining contingencies and construction updates. Bid Pack 5 is complete, and all remaining contingency will be moved back to the construction funding. Lakeland, White Lake Middle School, and Lakewood water main update. HVS steps are now completed, and we'll be handing that off to the township and the state of Michigan with a goal of completion by the end of summer 2024. This is significant and very exciting. We also reviewed our MAC Service Corp with Mr. Van Gotham. He gave the committee an update and we discussed the process, the education of the program, and the overall picture of buying into the MAC consortium. A successful implementation of this ongoing initiative will contribute to HVS district goal of revenue enhancement and cost containment. Mr. Van Gotham also gave us an update on the audit findings for fiscal year 23, and they were better than we expected. I would like to congratulate Mr. Van Gotham and his team. They have done excellent work with the budget. They have been meticulous, have been spot on with their estimates, which really makes it easy for us to make decisions up here. So thank you very much for your hard work. We expect to share the audit findings with the board November 29th. We expect to share them with the Finance Committee on the 29th and bring them to the board on December 4th. We also are going to be looking, I believe, this evening at the HVCS and the EXAA contracts. Dr. Salah asked the committee to review both the proposed contracts and is requesting approval at tonight's board meeting. Further discussion items will be our title grants and funding coming up. And we did adjourn at 9:35. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 15th at 8 a.m. at the administration building.
Thank you very much, Treasurer Grzelnkowski. Next, Communications, Marketing, and Legislation.
Yes, our last meeting was on October 17th at the administration office. Meeting was called to order at 3:05. Members present. I was present virtually. Amy Grzelnkowski was there. Lindsay Cotter, Barb Rothler, Paul Salah, and Kim Willis. Public comment, 0. Regular agenda. We discussed the new posting for HVS TV studio position. Communications went over the studio position posting before it was posted. I believe it is now posted. Yes, it's posted. We also discussed teacher communication platforms. A little bit of work was done to figure out what kind of platforms were the teachers using regarding communicating with parents. This all was collected and shared with us. Committee discussed privacy agreements and if the platforms would be uniform for the entire district or for different grade level groups. Next step, Barb's going to form a committee to work through the process and figure out what should come next. Next, we discussed family exit interviews, specifically when families leave the district. Are we having conversations with them to understand why they're leaving the district? At this point, there is no set family exit interview with the district. It was a follow-up brought up to the committee trying to get families to reconnect with the district. The committee discussed if calling or emails families with an exit survey would be beneficial for the district. No determination or action came out of that, just a discussion. We discussed Principal Month posts. Communication shared the positive feedback from the Principal Appreciation Month social media posts. The Education Matters newsletter, communication went out, the communications went over the topics for the next Education Matters newsletter being mailed to residents living in the district. Was mailed. In the process, soon. Watch your mailboxes. We discussed the live streaming of the board education meetings at that meeting, and then it was also at the exec committee meeting. Just looking at that and continuing to look at it over the next 6 months to a year, just to make sure that the work that's going in is useful and beneficial to our community. Safety and security, the second meeting was held that evening on the 17th. Topic focused on recon management and the architectural and technology point of view as it relates to safety and security. Legislative communication, Paul shared an update on the teacher evaluation legislation changes. Also discussed the proposed bill to require high school students to fill out financial aid forms before being allowed to graduate. We discussed the latest with the transportation legislation, changes to the retired teachers laws, and that management and operations will be handing out flyers to Duck Lake residents regarding the demolition of Duck Lake Center. Important to note in this section, there is a lot of education legislation going through the Michigan House and Senate. It's ongoing, and if you're interested in learning more, there's lots of resources out there from the Michigan PTA websites to the Michigan Education Association, all over the place. So it's changing every day, and lots of new things are coming through, and we're grateful for Neola and the other resources we have to make sure we stay up to date with our district policies as it relates to new laws being passed regarding education in the state of Michigan. We adjourned at 4:14. Our next meeting will be tomorrow, November 7th at 3 o'clock at the administration building.
Thank you very much. I just want to note my appreciation as it relates to all the members of the Board of Education. You spend a lot of time outside of these walls on these Mondays, working and focusing on what's best for our district. And these subcommittees are just an example of that. So it's certainly recognized, appreciated, and just want to say thank you for the work that you do. Next on the agenda is public comments. As I said before, we have a section, Section 3, and then also Section 7. I have 2 citizens participation forms regarding agenda and one on non-agenda items. People have filled them out. I'm going to move everything up to this section since we only have 2 of them. As a reminder, you have 3 minutes to present your comments. This is not a time for us to get into a conversation. It is an opportunity for us to listen. If there's something that can be responded to, we'll turn those over to Dr. Salah, and he will work through the process that we have established. So at this point in time, when I ask you to come up, please state your name again, address, and the school district in which you reside. I'm going to start with Dawn Collins.
Hi, I'm Dawn Collins. My address is 2630 Quartz Lane, Milford, and I do live in the Huron Valley School District. I'm also a 1973 graduate of Milford High School, a National Merit semifinalist, and I wanted to share with you my experience when the school district was going through some pretty significant growth problems at that time. And just to reiterate how important it is from the kids' perspective, that as adults, we pay attention to this. Excuse me for wobbling. I'm retired and I haven't done any public speaking in a few years. I went through K through 2nd grade in the same school. 3rd through 6th grade, my class was bused from one school to another. Each year we went to a different school. And I think there were several other classes that were also bused because we didn't have enough space. So obviously the district was going through some different problems. Junior high, I went to Highland Middle School through 7th through 9th grade. And senior high, I went half days. I went from I think it was just before 7 o'clock in the morning until somewhat afternoon, and my sister went from afternoon and finished up around, it just seemed late. It was 6:30 or 7. My best memories of school are the years that I was in one school for the period of time that I should have been in one school. My years of 3rd through 6th grade are just kind of a blur. Didn't make any real connection with any of the schools, with any of the other teachers except for my classroom teachers. And I want to thank you for taking such a thoughtful approach to this. Reiterate that 50 years sounds like a long time at certain age points, but it seems like it was yesterday in my mind in many ways. I also worked as a mental health therapist, and I cannot tell you how important stability is to so many of our kids. I was very fortunate in that I had a very stable background, very supportive parents. Academically, I did wonderfully. I was in the extracurricular activities, I worked. But there are a lot of kids out there that you would never guess by looking at them or even meeting their parents for the first time until you go into their homes and hear some of their stories, how unstable their home lives might be. And their school may be the most stable thing in their life. So as you're looking at making changes, please, please, please keep in mind that the kids need stability.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Next, Fred, you're up.
There we go. All right, roll it. First of all, my name's Fred Gorzik. Excuse me. I live at 4020 Beach, and I'm actually in West Bloomfield School District, but my heart, of course, always Huron Valley, former employee of Huron Valley. First of all, David Laura, my intern, congratulations. You don't get recognized on camera all the time. He's going to Eastern Michigan University and also has a connection with ESPN, right, as a chemical correspondent. So there's Huron Valley Schools at work right there. And in our studio last year worked out great. I really believe in the internship. We ought to do that in all categories. Hey, we didn't have school recognitions. I'm sort of here for school recognitions. I left kind of quickly last year. I was terminated from the school district and in June. And so I'm here I want to thank some of the people who I've worked with, and notably the teachers. Excuse me, not many of them are here. We have representatives, the teachers, the principals. They're the best. I worked with them and they're so good. And I really appreciate working with them. And you guys can all feel pretty good about that, but not too good, because the administration, I think we have a little room for improvement for the administration. Board, I hand it to you for all the work that you do. You guys work hard. You're smart folks. You're so dedicated. I appreciate all you do. And so thank you very much for that. As far as when I left, I was terminated by Barb Rothler and Jeanette here, and rubber stamped by Paul Salah. But I'm not here to talk on a personal note, Tom, of course.
Thank you very much. I'd like you to make certain that you stay with your comments,
right,
and address the board as a whole, please.
Well, that is background.
Thank you.
Just so you know. But that is the background of the situation. But that's not, that gives you background for me to say that I think there's room for improvement. It's funny that you would talk about exit surveys. I didn't get a lot of exit surveys. I didn't get a cake. That's okay. And also, for all you folks who are, I will say this because I didn't get a chance to say it before, not many people called me to say, Fred, you worked for the district for 24 years. What happened? Did anybody call? One person did. Denise Pistana saying, Fred, you did a great job on our video. You know, what happened? So I want to thank you, Denise Pistana, and I'll be back another day, hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Next on the agenda is consent agenda. We only have one item, Exhibit A, which is the approval of the minutes. May I have a motion, please?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda, Exhibit A, as presented.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Motion made by Member Dodd, seconded by Member Ryan. Any questions, comments? Seeing none? Who was it? I'm sorry. Oh, was it Amy? What?
Yeah. I know, voices carried.
What? I guess so, yes. I'm corrected. Could I go ahead and have a roll call, please?
Ms. Dodd?
Yes.
Ms. Grisomkowski?
Yes.
Ms. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Cotter?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Mr. Dimick?
Yes.
And Mr. Wiseman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next, under unfinished business, first item, Exhibit B, which is the approval of the contract, is presented at the previous meeting. This is an opportunity we were presenting, went through great detail at the last board meeting. Dr. Salah?
Thank you, Mr. President. Also walked through this at a couple of committees. I have not had any additional questions. Mr. Van Gotham, have you had further questions?
No, I have not.
So at this point, Mr. President, we would request board approval of contract award bid pack 12 Duck Lake Center demolition, or I'm sorry, asbestos abatement. We're on A.
Anyone have any other questions? Seeing none, do I have a motion? Motion made by Member Connor, seconded by Member Dodd. Could I have a roll call, please?
Ms. Cotter,
Yes.
Ms. Dodd,
Yes.
I'm a yes. Ms. Grzymkowski,
Yes.
Mr. Dimick,
Yes.
Ms. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Wiseman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next is the approval of contract bid pack 12 for the demolition. Dr. Salah.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Same script on this one. I don't believe we've had any questions. We've discussed it at length and reviewed it in the various committees. If there are no questions, we would ask for approval this evening of item B, approval of contract award for bid pack 12, Duck Lake Center building demolition.
Do we have any further questions? Yes, Member Cotter?
I know I've heard this. I just needed to be reminded. When do we anticipate the demolition?
So we are communicating with the community tomorrow. If the board approves, we've created flyers, and then the asbestos abatement will start. And then once the asbestos removal has been complete and it's safe, that is when the demolition will take place.
Thank you.
Yes, Member Dodd.
Just like to thank you for communicating with the community about this. I think whenever asbestos is involved and demolition, those are the two times they tell you to be most concerned about asbestos. So thank you for preparing a really comprehensive piece of communication to the community members and making sure that they're aware of what's happening in their breathable airspace.
Any other comments, questions? The only one I have is to piggyback on what Member Cotter, you mentioned that we're going to communicate right away. What is the timeline between the two? Obviously, you're coordinating this. Asbestos is first, demolition is second. What's the time frame that people could see this?
So Jeffrey, feel free to jump in here. When you're in the process of removing asbestos, you don't really know how much asbestos there is. You have a good idea. It is overseen by our environmental agency, NOVA. But sometimes, this building is a great example of that. This summer, we were moving asbestos in order to prepare for renovations. Actually ended up taking 2 or 3 weeks longer, and it pushed us back, which is why our office space is not completed here at Milford High School. So, Jeffrey, do you have a tentative timeline?
Yeah, so I can say that the first couple of weeks will be just for asbestos removal time. The tentative goal would be that before the end of the calendar year 2023 that everything would be taken care of. But again, to preface what Dr. Salas, it's really all a matter of what happens once we get through our asbestos piece, because we want to be mindful, as Mrs. Dodd indicated, to be smart about it and take our time and do the job right. So I would say the calendar year 2023 is the expected goal for both asbestos and demolition.
Thank you. And I think it's important to note, I certainly applaud the communication. This is above and beyond what is required, but it's certainly something that we want to do as a good neighbor. At the same time, the asbestos abatement is heavily regulated. We have to follow state guidelines. Air inspection, air quality is always checked and has to be approved, and it's constantly being monitored. So I just want to make sure that people understand. We have a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve contract award for bid pack 12 Duck Lake Center demolition.
All right, we have a motion by Member Dimick, a second by Member Ryan. If there are no other questions, comments, do we have a roll call?
Absolutely. Mr. Dimick,
Yes.
Ms. Ryan,
Yes.
Ms. Grzymkowski,
Yes.
Ms. Cotter,
Yes.
I'm a yes. Ms. Dodd,
Yes.
and Mr. Wiseman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next, Exhibit D, droplet software purchase. Dr. Slot.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, this is second reading on the droplet software purchase that we have, and we are requesting approval. We have not had any additional questions from the board as we have discussed this in multiple committees and presented it at the last meeting.
Is there any follow-up? Seeing none, could I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the droplet software purchase.
Motion made by Member Grzymkowski. Do I have a second? Second by Member Dodd. No questions? Seeing none, roll call.
Ms. Grzymkowski,
Yes.
Ms. Dodd,
Yes.
Ms. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Dimick.
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Cotter
Yes.
and Mr. Wiseman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next, under new business, the normal pro forma is that it goes under new business and then is acted under unfinished business at the next board meeting. All three of these items are requested by administration to be approved at this board meeting. One is an emergency purchase, and the other two are contracts that we have in the past approved other contracts with one reading also. So we're going to start with, and I know we discussed this at Finance and Operations. Treasurer Grzynkowski went into great detail as it relates to this, but I'll turn it over to Dr. Slah if you would like to add anything.
Yeah, I would ask Mr. Van Gotham to take this one.
So I would agree with Wiseman that Ms. Grzynkowski did a good job kind of kicking it off for the steam boiler. So as Dr. Salah alluded to as well, we have 2 steam boilers at Muir Middle School, and where we really rely on those is redundancy, so that if one is not operational, the second one will heat the school. We have 4 tubes that are leaking within one of our boilers. These are 17 years old and have not had any of these tubes replaced in the past. If we do this fix on the tubes, while it's $68,000, it will take care of about 70% of the boiler, is my understanding. So the flame or the heat component will not be replaced, but really virtually everything else will be taken care of. And so as we've talked a little bit about strategic planning tonight, independent of what happens with those decisions, we need to make sure that the kids at Muir right now have heat. And so they are having heat right now, but this will allow us to have that redundancy for the rest of this winter and future winters as well. So we're asking that this be an emergency purchase. We talked about it on Wednesday. Dr. Salah does have the ability to make emergency purchases and then ask after the fact for the board to kind of to stamp it, if you will. But we thought bringing it this evening, having a discussion, being able to take questions, and then ultimately the board approving it will allow us to then, give the green light to the purchase, and we will have this complete within 5 weeks of the approval. So if we get the green light tonight, we're mid-December before we should be up and running on that second one. And we consider this emergency because it's obviously the start of heating season.
Anything else to add? I will say there was a significant cost savings by replacing all the tubes as opposed to just replacing a few of them. So I appreciate that. And this really compresses the timeline by 2 weeks. So it's important for us. And it's also important to note that we certainly are aware of the situation, and you explained that to the Finance and Operations Committee in great detail. Any other questions? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve this?
I move that the Board of Education approve the emergency purchase of the steam boiler repair at Muir Middle School as presented.
All right, thank you, Treasurer Grzynkowski. Do I have a second? Support. Second by Member Cotter. Any other questions? Seeing none, may I have a roll call?
Ms. Grzynkowski,
Yes.
Ms. Cotter,
Yes.
I'm a yes. Mr. Dimick,
Yes.
Ms. Dodd,
Yes.
Ms. Ryan,
Yes.
and Mr. Wiseman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next, B and C are both contracts. One is EXAA contract, Exhibit F. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Slah.
I'm going to ask Ms. Weiner to speak to those two.
Thanks, Dr. Slah. So tonight, the ask is for the board to take action on these items separately, but my summary is going to cover both together. So once we settled with our HVESP secretarial group, our level 4 secretaries within that group, that's the highest classification, those wages had surpassed the base salary for our confidential secretaries. So this led us to take a closer look at those wages, as well as the executive assistant to Dr. Salah, and really gather some market data, some comparables with surrounding districts to really take a look at, are we being competitive, and are we going to be able to retain staff? There's a lot of succession planning that goes on from level 4 secretaries to confidentials, and then potentially to the executive assistant to the superintendent. So what we found is we were slightly lower. So it was important for us to get that, those competitive wages. And so we met with both the confidentials and the executive assistant to the superintendent. And where we essentially landed for both contracts is that they would be extended through June 30th, 2026, so like 2.5 years. We increased the wages so that level 4, the gap widened with the level 4 secretaries for both the confidential secretaries and executive assistant to the superintendent. We added a 6th step to the confidential wages, and then we added education factors that were not there before. So for those holding a degree, they would receive an amount for an associate's, bachelor's, and master's. And then one additional paid holiday, Martin Luther King Day, which was pretty consistent with a lot of the negotiations this year. So again, looking for action tonight on both of these separately, but those contracts are summarized together.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yes.
Just a comment about the executive assistant to the superintendent. She also has to deal with the entire board. So there is a lot of extra work on her plate, especially me. I can be.
Well, that should be your pleasure.
2 or 3.
That's probably the highlight. Huh? No questions? No comments? I made one, I guess. A couple comments or questions. How many people are we talking about here?
So as far as I know, Dr. Salah has one assistant.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, one, and then
It's got a lot of
3.
bosses, only one assistant.
3 confidential secretaries.
Okay.
So 4 total.
And they really are not represented by an association or anything.
No, they're just a handbook group.
So we took a look at that handbook group of 4 people.
Correct.
And made certain that their salaries were representative of the responsibilities they have. And quite frankly, this is the last 4 as we've gone through a variety of negotiations with various groups within our district. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, very good. As I said before, this is consistent with what we've done as we've ratified or had contracts that are ratified. These are 2 items, B and C, so we're going to take this as 2 motions and 2 votes. So could I have a motion as it relates to Exhibit B, which is the EXAA contract?
I'll make the motion. I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Okay, the voice is, yes, you have a question.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I just would love, just for complete clarity, EXAA is whom?
Executive assistant to the superintendent. Heather.
Got it. And HVCS are those 3 other confidential folks. Okay, just wanted to make sure that I was clear on which line was which person. Thank you.
So are you going to make a motion?
No.
Oh.
I
Okay.
will make the motion.
Member Bastan has made the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And a second by Member Demick. If there are no other questions, comments, or clarifications, we'll have a roll call then.
I am a yes. Mr. Demick.
Yes.
Ms. Cotter.
Yes.
Ms. Dodd.
Yes.
Ms. Grisomkowski.
Yes.
Ms. Ryan.
Yes.
Mr. Wiseman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next, HVCS contract, Exhibit G. May I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the HVCS contract as presented.
Do I have a second?
I'll support.
Okay. Motion by Member Demick, seconded by Member Grisomkowski. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, could I have a roll call?
Mr. Dimick.
I'm a yes.
Ms. Grisomkowski.
Yes.
Ms. Ryan.
Yes.
Ms. Cotter.
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Dodd.
Yes.
And Mr. Wiseman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Next is Section 7, which is public comments. Heather, do we have any other public comments? Is there any other public comments this time? Seeing none, go to Good and Welfare. Good and Welfare tonight. I'll go with Member Cotter first.
My hand went up first anyway. So I just wanted to recognize that on Sunday, a big fundraiser for our community sharing called the Empty Bowl Project. I was able to go and participate and have some soup. Soup was being served by a number of community members, including our superintendent, Dr. Salah. He looked very fashionable in his hairnet that day. But anyway, what I wanted to point out with this was attended by many people from the community, and all the funds raised are going to go to help community sharing, which has a direct impact on our students here in Huron Valley. But I did want to give a shout out. I think it's Danielle Vivio, our art teacher at White Lake Middle School. Her students created a very nice line of ceramic bowls that were available for those people attending. When you walked in after you registered, you actually picked out a bowl and went into the main room and were able to taste all different kinds of soup, and it was very good. But I was real proud to see our White Lake kids had some of their work was available. I was actually going to grab one, but some of them look more like I don't know that I wanted to put soup in it. They look too nice. So, but just a shout out, it's a great fundraiser for the community. Thank you.
And you said Dr. Salah was serving soup?
He was serving soup.
What was his flavor? What type of soup was he delivering?
You know, I didn't get it because I was waiting for the lobster bisque.
What was it, Dr. Salah?
It was the Mexican fiesta soup. It was the new Mexican restaurant that replaced Palette.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. It's always good to have a career backup.
As we've devolved. I have two things. So I may have poked our superintendent, get it there, for the lengthy strategic plan 2.0 discussion tonight. But I do think it's important for folks to hear out there how much intentional communication is going into making sure we're bringing people along with us on this strategic plan journey. And that communications, I think I've heard it a lot. So it seemed long for me, but anybody who hasn't, it's really important, vital information. The website exists. Every single presentation that we have heard and the communication and the committees have heard, it's online. So if you want to get caught up with things, I don't know anything that's not on this website. Neither does anyone else on this board or any of the folks who've served on that committee, some of whom are here with us in the group tonight. We're doing everything we can to help bring people along. These are very difficult decisions. We know they're going to impact kids, and we know they're going to impact their lives. So it's important that we work on bringing people along with us on what are those decision points that are helping make this happen. I know as a parent myself, I'm thinking of it from my family's perspective, my peer group's perspective, our district's perspective, our budget perspective, the teacher's perspective. It's a lot, but I think it's important that we bring everybody along with us. So regardless of who you are, go check them out. There's even summaries, so you don't have to watch the whole thing if you don't want to. Little summaries on there, but very helpful to help bring you along. Second, again, echoing thank you to the veterans who came tonight, as well as everyone who submitted names. This is a nice tradition that we have, and I think being able to shout that out is helpful, and I do appreciate all of our schools for doing veterans things. And then the third one is, this is just a personal request. If anyone knows of coat drives that are happening in the district, please let me know, because I have looked at all of our communication pages to find out who's doing a coat drive, and I haven't found one. Milford High School is?
Yeah.
All right.
Walking in tonight, I saw the sign about bringing it in.
Problem solved. So if you have coats to donate, this is the place to do it. And I know all of that sort of stuff is happening all over the district, but coat drives. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yes, Jacob.
Just a quick note. I have it on my calendar for November 17th, 18th, and 19th. We're planning to go on the 18th, but Hello Dolly at Milford High School. So that's coming up.
9 to 5. 9 to 5.
9 to 5, yes. Sorry, my fault.
Great, thank you for sharing. Yes, Ms. Pastana.
Just to follow up to last time, trick or trucks at the Rec and Ed department. They had over 620 kids registered, and it was a great night. We were out there. I brought some pictures, and I also think, is there a video too yet? No, just picture. Well, anyway, look up there. It was a good night. Miss Loso did a great job, all of her group, and kids were having a lot of fun.
Oh. Great, thank you. Anyone else? Since I see one of those yellow buses, it reminds me too that our bus drivers, our transportation department does a lot of different things and gives back to the community during the holidays. I know one that coming up is their participation in the parade that's coming up, the holiday parade. And they're asking for donations, and they're asking for donations of candy that can be shared. So if any of you have some surplus Halloween candy, all you have to do is drop it off. You can just stop, and they have a big bucket in their hallway that you can just drop it off to them. So as a reminder. Anything else? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.